Cancelled flights, hour-long queues at the airport, and hundreds of unhappy customers. That's what happened last year in Europe and the US once COVID-19 restrictions were scaled back. And now that China is open once again, airports in Asia are bracing for a new surge of revenge travelers.
Our latest scenario 7, actually, we expect the whole APAC region, the demand is coming back to 2019 level by perhaps November 2023.
But some experts say Asian airports are in a better position than their Western counterparts, as the reopening in this part of the world has happened more gradually.
Not everything came back at once. So like in Europe, you saw, more of a swing from 10% to 90% in a quicker period of time. So that was one key difference. And the other key difference is how airports handled it. So in Europe, the manpower levels weren't so great. There was less, government support, say, compared to Singapore. And also the big difference is that, airports just let airlines come back as they wanted to, at least initially. Once there were issues, then they started more managing the airline operations to a bigger extent. But in a lot of the airports in this part of the world, including Singapore, they were managing from the beginning of the reopening in the second quarter of last year, the ramp up. So, so some airlines weren't able to get the flights they wanted to get because the airports wanted to avoid any kind of impact on service levels.
While the manpower crunch remains a challenge for the aviation sector, industry players remain optimistic.
Quite a lot of the old staff have moved on to other areas, and we're having to recruit new staff and to train them. I think this is continuing to be a challenge. But last year when CAS held the One Aviation Career Fair, that was in May, we had an overwhelming response. I think over 2 days we had something like 11,000 job seekers to visit the fair. That was probably 3-4 times the number of jobs on offer.
One of the positives that came out of the pandemic was the acceleration of digitization efforts. And such tech innovations will continue to shape the future experience for passengers.
So if you look at Terminal 4, for example, you can actually go to the airport and not talk to anyone or interact with anyone by checking in yourself, getting your bags dropped yourself, going through immigration, through the biometric system, and straight away going to your aircraft. And that's one of the things that probably more airports will be looking at.
Another positive for the region is that the Asia-Pacific has the largest concentration of airport development projects compared to other regions. It also leads the way in terms of current committed investment with $227 billion. Many of these projects, including Singapore's T5 terminal, were delayed by the pandemic, but are now being fast-tracked.
I mean, a year ago, people would not have expected this kind of recovery, to happen in this pace, but it has. And as a result, we're going to be, in the growth mode again starting from next year. And after that, we can potentially see again a return to rapid growth. So all these airports and all these countries, they need to plan for that and get again ahead of the curve. There was a few years that was lost in terms of because of the pandemic, but there's also been a few years lost in terms of construction and expansion because a lot of things were delayed or put in the back burner. So now is the time to basically put the pedal to the metal and to get these projects back going again, because if you don't, you can get behind the growth curve.
The pandemic also changed the way people travel.
We need to be aware of the shift of the demand pattern. And post-pandemic, people are spending more time planning their journeys and making sure they are covered for unexpected changes. And tourists are keen to stay longer when they do travel. Of course, for some markets, resuming more rapidly than expected, then there might be issues around the resource constraints, such as a shortage of staff, typically with airlines, airports, ground handling, and other like security, customs, immigration sector. So before, a lot of the travel, business travel, perhaps is long haul, is now becoming more shorter distance travels. So there is a growing need for airports to continuously upgrade their infrastructure and improve customer experience, particularly for domestic or short haul services in the next couple of years.
Market watchers also say that the post-pandemic spike in ticket prices could continue in the near term.
First is the supply side constraint that's been caused by the pandemic. And in APAC region, now the ticket price are typically high, as that's because the capacity offered from the airlines by the airlines currently can't match the sudden strong demand recovery. But with the ease of a constraint from a supply side, the more airline capacity is available, then airfare will go back to a more realistic level. And eventually it will depend on the balance between supply and demand in each individual market.